Welcome to the Covering Data podcast, covering guests from the data, development, and IT world. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Covering Data podcast. I'm Eric Strom with Covering Data Consulting, and today for podcast numero uno, we're going to be talking with Jessy Houle with Absolute Development. Jessy is the founder as well as a technical consultant with Absolute Development, and has been around in the industry for quite a while. But why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Jessy?
Yep. Well, at 13, I was completely consumed by video games and very specifically Sierra video games. Um, I ended up writing Ken Williams, the owner of Sierra Games, telling him I was 13 at the time, but when I was 18, that I was going to come work for him. And,
Nice.
and I also asked for a little bit of advice, what can I do between now and 18? And he wrote me back actually a few weeks later. Super excited to get it. And it was a very prescriptive letter. It was learn C, learn this new language coming out, C++, and get a computer science degree. So for my next birthday, I asked for Borland C++, the compiler, I believe is like 1.0 at the time,
Oh,
and then
wow.
2 books, C and C++, and ended up just burying myself into that stuff for, next few years. And, I found really that as much as I enjoyed video games for, certain reasons, it's, the maker side of it, the, solving puzzles and strategy and so on and so forth. I found that programming, and even specifically later on, business problems have their own puzzles to them as well, and it's just as fun, if not more fun. So that's really how I got into it.
So you definitely got the bug pretty early comparatively, huh?
Yes, I did.
Well, that's pretty cool, actually.
Yep.
Um, what do you think is different about people getting started today versus like when you were getting started, like really in the professional development, like versus when you're kind of doing it kind of from a hobbyist perspective?
I love how
What's
you kind of
different?
edge around the whole thing of like, hey, dude, you're old. Remember back in the day? I
You're
would
not the
say
only one.
I would say the rate of change. I mean, things are changing just, any given week you could see a new JavaScript framework or a new platform or some new packages, whatever else, So I'd say now, comparatively to back in the day, you definitely have to stay on top of things. Otherwise, within a year, few years, you're going to become stagnant. So that'd be I'd say the biggest thing.
Yeah, no kidding. I was just realizing there's a feature in SQL Server that I kind of set aside back in 2014, and I was like looking today, and it's like, wow, 8 years have already passed, and like
Right, right.
I I haven't learned the depths of this feature yet, and it's like you
Sure.
know it it is a big number, you know what I mean? So
Oh yeah, yep, yep.
appreciate
Yeah,
that.
especially in the JavaScript world, man, things are changing like
Yeah.
all the time.
I totally stopped trying to keep up with JavaScript frameworks
Sure.
for for quite a while now.
Yep.
Well, how do you think it helped you when you got started? Like when you were just getting started, and versus today, would you say there was any good things about starting back in the I don't know the
Come
90s
on,
or
go ahead, you can say it. Yeah, around the 90s. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Can I start this one? Well, back in the day. So I would say, honestly, the one thing that I really appreciate that I brought forward was, we had to worry about fitting things in KB of RAM, kilobytes of RAM, so having to write really efficient code back in the day, was really important. I mean, as it was that was the only way that you could write code, and today I noticed that, I definitely am a little bit more methodical than maybe some folks that are just getting into the field. Um, Not saying I'm slower necessarily, but I'm definitely a lot more conscious of memory type things and disk space and latency between networks and stuff like that. So yeah, that is one thing I definitely brought forward and I appreciate from back in the day.
Yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And even if you're in the cloud and you're not obsessing about CPU cycles and memory and all that kind of thing,
Hmm.
I mean, the old hardware caps are now, dollars and cents, right? So
Right.
even if you think like, oh, in the cloud we don't have to worry about that anymore. It's just, well, yeah, wait until you get your monthly bill though. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Times 1,000, times 1 million, times 10 million. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. At some point you got to worry about it. And when you're growing big, you're gonna hope that you have that for sure.
Yeah, totally. Well, let's pivot a little bit to some of the people that the both of us tend to help, technology leaders, right? So,
Sure.
what would you say that many don't really get about working on software projects that you really wish they'd understand? Like, let's say, I don't know how you want to put it, like working on software project 101 or something like that, right?
Sure, sure. I think just right out of the gate, it's the true meaning of value. People and for that matter, outside vendors are not all equal. I see far too many companies that are hiring based completely on solely on cost. Um, one ditch digger could be maybe twice as good as another ditch digger, but really when it comes down to it, our field is much more pronounced in that way. One person could be 10 times, 20 times as good or as efficient or fast or whatever it might be as another. It's much more pronounced in our field. Um, and at the end of the day, I mean, hire the backhoe operator. You might pay him 4 times more, but he'll get the job done, 50 times faster and probably better. So I'd say value, just like looking at the true value.
Yeah, that's totally right. And I would say too, the the measure of value really becomes apparent kind of on the back end. Like, I
Hmm.
started as a DBA for like a decade, and some of the software vendors, it was just totally clear, the quality of their product, just
Hmm.
based on how you were managing the database. Like,
Right.
have you had to clean up many projects kind of that, let's say, went south? They didn't start out with a good valued vendor, let's say, and you ended up
Hmm.
kind of trying to clean up the mess.
That's where I get all my work.
Totally fair. I'd be lying if I if that wasn't the case for me too,
Right.
so. um well, how about if you're going to go in-house, like, do you have any advice for managers or directors, like if you are trying to do a decent sized project and starting out in-house instead?
Yeah, I mean, if you're just starting out, I forget who said it, but it's hire slow, fire fast. So that'd be, I guess, the one. And I'd say hire high caliber, passionate technologists. People that have setups in their house and who, read the books for fun and stuff like that. So I don't know how you can really interview for that, but just try to get passionate technologists. And I'd say, secondly, don't shy away from outside help, because, it's not really even a pitch necessarily for you or I or whomever, but, there's times when speed to market or expertise in-house doesn't, match with what you have hired. So, just don't shy away from that, I would say as well. Um, I guess maybe finally, depending on your need, be open, not be open, but rather be um, looking for companies that are truly wanting to help you. I I look at, I don't want to put all people in this category, but maybe let's just say I haven't hardly ever met a project that is exactly 3 months or exactly 6 months or exactly a year with exactly 40 hours of this person's time. So maybe look for those companies that are willing to, come on and do projects and, invoice for the hours they're working, not necessarily for, this set amount of time, because if your project goes over the 3 months, it's 4 months or whatever, can you go in and can you say, hey, I need a month more, whatever else, so just look for those companies that are sincerely trying to help you, I'd say.
Yeah, totally. Especially, if you're getting started off for the first time on a decent sized project,
Hmm.
it doesn't have to be like tons of help, but just having somebody who's done it a lot of times and knows the pitfalls and can kind of start you on a good path, even if you don't use them for the entire duration of the project. I mean,
Hmm.
that can mean success or failure,
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
yeah.
Yep.
But, yeah, that's a good point. Well, so when would you say it's better to involve an outside development firm rather than just building it yourself?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, each company is completely different. I would say the business side of me would say do it in-house if you can. Um, and I know I'm the worst salesman in the world by saying that, but um, if you have speed to market requirements, like I was mentioning before, or you can't handle it from a expertise side with your current staff, I'd suggest, maybe looking to the future. So, maybe not jump the gun right away and hire those outside folks, but maybe look at, is this a need that you're going to want to have or that you will consistently have in the future, and if you do, well, then hire for it. But if not, then I would say um, look for outside help. Again, never shy away from that, I would say. And honestly, there's another kind of sector of that whole thing, and they might be the fringe, but think of maybe like a construction company, that might want to integrate one system to another system. Should they really have internal in-house programming staff, if they just need it for this one thing, I think that a lot of businesses should focus on their business and not necessarily try to, always hire in and stuff. And I see a lot of companies actually hiring in for some reason. I'm not necessarily sure why.
No, I can appreciate that. What what would you say are some of the common problems you see when a CTO engages an external dev team that could be avoided? Like, that is, what does an effective partnership look like when you're engaging with an outside team?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. I'd say have a clear picture of why you're engaging an external dev team. I mean, I think a lot of managers, kind of just go that route, just knee jerk. So just, have a real clear picture on why you are. Have the parameters kind of marked out as far as what they're responsible for, what your internal teams are responsible for. I'd say think about things like, how does this external development team fit into the picture? Um, what do I expect from them? Stuff like that. It's just a lot of thinking ahead of things before you even engage them. And really, on a personal note, I'd suggest engaging firms that have the same goals as they do, and not just like not looking at it as another contract. To cut through the sales pitch, so to speak, and look for companies that are sincerely wanting to help you succeed.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a very good point. Do you think there's ways to vet companies that are just in it to make some cash versus somebody who really wants to partner up with you?
I would go back to that, what I was saying before with if they're willing to do a project with you and if they're willing to say have people come in, let's I'll give you an example from a contract that I once had. Really, when it came down to it, it was a matter of myself coming in and laying down the foundations, kind of getting the team back in order and laying down the foundation for a single stripe of architecture, and from that point, kind of helping some of the people understand how to do that stripe and then, to rinse repeat for other things that they needed. But, after that point, they really didn't need me for, the full year or for, another 3 months or whatever even. So, look for, I'd say, a company that's willing to work with you from like a time base, not just here's a contract 3 months, here's a contract 6 months, and you have to have them 40 hours, so. And I know I'm pitching myself by saying that, but hey, whatever. I think it's something that's needed, and I think it's something that's missing in our field, actual project work, not necessarily just contracts.
Yeah, and I remember like some conversations that we've had in the past too. Like, what would you say too about kind of when you're exiting, like how to ramp down a project well and get it kind of ready for the
For sure.
maintenance phase, if you will.
Yeah, yep. And part of that is planning ahead of time that that you're coming in and you will leave, so making that code, or in your case, database, whatever it might be, having data dictionaries or whatever it is, having that stuff in place, knowing that you're going to be transferring that over. I think, that's another telltale sign of a company that's really looking out for your best interest, instead of just like, how can I get in and how can I get my claws in, but rather how can I make this maintainable to pass to the internal teams.
Yeah, make yourself obsolete by the time you're leaving. They're like,
Yeah, yeah,
I know how this works and I can maintain it. And
sure.
you're good
I
to
know it
go.
sounds weird, right? But at the same point, I think that if you actually drive towards that, I think you'll be a lot better off, and you'll get a lot more business for it.
Totally. Yeah, that's a fair point. So let's see, why do you think so many IT projects do go over time and over budget? And like when you actually run a project, how do you try to prevent that?
There's a lot of variables in this one.
Yeah, no
Um,
kidding.
can I answer this with the programmer's it depends?
Yeah.
I say a few things come to mind. Lack of good requirements. Another one is lack of leadership and direction. Um, yeah. And
Well,
let's be honest, sometimes it sits squarely upon the team. In some cases they may not have the expertise, or in other cases they can't foresee roadblocks or whatever else. So, it's kind of it's on both sides, you know, both
that's
business and technology.
so so now just for you from a vendor perspective, like have you ever run into projects where it was just totally clear that they had no idea what it was doing, what they were doing, like what they wanted to build and all that kind of stuff? Like have you walked away from any of that kind of stuff, or like just I don't see this going very well or anything like that?
Yeah, I always try not to like actually just walk away from things, actually, but um yeah, I'd say most of the times it's people problems, it's prior decisions that were made, and really it's just a matter of trying to use the soft skills to kind of correct things instead of the actual code or architecture or whatever else. And a lot of times it feels like we're CEO whisper, or no, CTO whispers or whatever kind of a thing, because sometimes it comes from higher up, but then at other times, it's the tech side of it where they made decisions early on and they kind of went down that path, and they're you know going down that path, and then you got to try to find ways to get them out of that path. But um, yeah, there's just so many variables to so many different companies. One company, bringing people in, it might be their hiring decisions and who they hired. They thought, this guy looks really nerdy. Let's get this guy in, and maybe he turns out to be not very good at programming, just looks nerdy.
Yeah. Have you ever seen um like rigid need to follow process? Like I've seen this a little bit before, like with let's say Scrum Agile, where
Hmm.
like the people are being totally beaten over the head with the process and is really not fitting what they're trying to do. Have you ever run into something like that before at all?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Again, on both sides, it's um, I'd say from the business end, like you're saying, the different practices, whatever they might be, agile or waterfall or whatever else. But then even on the development side though too, I mean, there's the one camp that can be we're going to follow this pattern by the T, or we're going to follow this whatever by the T. And a lot of times I found patterns to mostly be useful when you can make them manageable to the situation instead of following something to the T. So
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, really, what I've found is whenever you're at a new org, you might really like a type of process, but you go in there and you're like, yeah, this wouldn't work here.
you're
You know
right,
what I
right.
mean?
Yep,
It's just like, okay, well, maybe we can introduce some concepts and kind of guide them a little bit, but we
sure.
don't have to be hard and fast about this is how we got to do it and blah blah blah.
Hmm. Right. Yep, totally.
Well, from process, I suppose to more technology, like what kind of bleeding or leading edge tech is really exciting you right now? What just looks really, I don't know, something that you want to dig into more or already have, and so a lot of
Sure.
fun and whatnot.
Sure. Yeah. Honestly, although I haven't dug into it a lot, the thing that excites me probably the most is the VR, AR, mixed reality space, and then how it could mesh in with machine learning, because I think those two camps together is, boy, it's a game changer. I don't know how, but I kind of see something there for sure, and I get excited about it. I'd love to dig into those more.
Yeah, it is getting really interesting as just like anything can be data nowadays, and like
Hmm.
whether it's visual, audio, I mean any type of let's say more human focused data versus just like ones and zeros, you know what I mean?
Right. Yep. Totally. Yeah. And
The
in your field too, I suppose, even in the sense of like data sciences, I mean, being able to, see something in front of you, from a perspective that will actually allow you to make good business decisions, like right in front of you, that, boy, yeah, I I don't know. I don't know the details of it, but boy, oh boy, it there's something there for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And with all the ways that you can just, and this is my data cap that I'm putting on, but
Sure.
all the ways that you can store data nowadays, and there's all different types of data stores, and ultimately, I mean, you still got to massage the data a bit, and do that kind of stuff, but there's there's gold pretty much anywhere that if you're looking for it, if you store the data, and that in some ways that's a little bit intimidating because it's like, well, what am I not using that I could have been using that would have helped me? You know what I
Right,
mean?
for sure, absolutely.
Uh,
Yep.
well, that's pretty cool. So back to you. So what was one of the high points of your career? Like, what one of the things that you're just looking back and thinking, that was pretty freaking awesome.
I honestly, if you don't mind, I actually got two.
Oh, sure, sure.
One was my time at Ally Bank because, is working with just a bunch of great friends, people who now are, technology leaders in their own fields. And but it was more than just working with them. We had all sorts of fun. For example, I remember one time I went out to lunch with my parents. They took me out for my birthday, and I came back and everything on my desk was tinfoiled. I mean, down to the pen, and it's. I mean, so we had a good time with things like that. And at the same point, the caliber of folks that were working there. I mean, we did some pretty amazing things and using some great technologies. Yeah, I do definitely miss that camaraderie and the friendships, and yet still, in deep into the tech, play hard and work hard. But another one that I'd say, that I'm really fond of is when I first started out, my first real like career job was at Best Buy. And first of all, working on bestbuy.com when you're a teenager and early 20s, boy, I mean, tell me that isn't cool, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
But then, also, the owner would even come around, to our desk sometimes. And, that was kind of neat to see that, it was at that point, maybe not as well, not even close to as big as it is right now, but it's still a bigger company, and you still get that appreciation. But we would have, like, say, Cyndi Lauper would come into the cafeteria and start singing, for example.
Or
Or I remember one time a buddy of mine, Andy Pickett, and I were walking back in from lunch, and there's this bald dude, he's kind of like strutting and walking, past us, and he goes, "Well, what's up, guys?" And I said, "Hey, how's it going?" And then Andy turned to me, and he goes, "Do you know who that was?" And I'm like, I don't. He's like, "That was Moby." I'm like, "No way, really?" So, I mean, we'd have
wow.
stuff like that all the time. It was just cool as could be. And one final one on that is they used to have a thing where you could buy a box, because they'd get in all these, like, products from all these different companies, and just to try out, to trial or whatever. And they'd have these boxes that you could buy for $5. And again, think of me as like teenage, early 20s, and they could sell you this box for $5, and everything that you could put in the box, and carry out is basically for $5. So think about like CDs and all that kind of stuff. And oh man, as a early 20s teen boy, that was just the best. But
Yeah. That sounds
now,
like a lot of fun.
yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
cool. Um, well, so getting back to kind of the newer devs and all that.
Hmm.
What advice do you have for developers getting started? Like anything that you wish you had known when you were young, or that maybe uh, younger folks getting started today would
Sure.
really benefit just to hear.
Yeah, and I'll pre-caveat this with, I say this because these are things that I did wrong. So, take this with
Hmm.
a grain of salt when I say it. But not all things are logical, and then that's okay. I'd say stay away from things like sentences like, well, actually. I think we all know how that kind of goes, right? And again, don't get me wrong, that was me back in the day, so I would say work on your soft skills as much as your technical skills. I don't know how many times I look back at different situations where, things that could be handled by code could a lot more simply be handled by a fairly well written email, and I know it doesn't sound great, but or presenting something, a different maybe strategy or technology or whatever else. So, those soft speaking, like the speaking skills, kind of a thing as well. I'd say, focus on that as much as your tech. If you're passionate about tech, that's great. Be at least as diligent in the soft skills, and not so much that you have to be passionate about it, but be diligent in it.
Yeah, and actually,
I'd be
I'm
curious of your thoughts on it.
yeah, I mean that's a really good point, especially in the data modeling space too, because I remember when I was starting to learn all that stuff when I was I kind of was going to the U of M while I was also working as a DBA. So, I was really starting to learn some of the more data modeling conceptual stuff then.
Hmm.
And I remember just being too inflexible and like trying to really wanting the data and the business to fit the model. And it just like
Hmm.
totally didn't. So I remember having to make a lot of compromises finally when, the square peg just didn't fit in the round hole. You
Yeah,
know what I
right.
mean?
Oh yeah.
But but yeah, I mean, there you do have to have a certain grace for imperfect processes and imperfect, you know, business knowledge, whatever. Because
Hmm.
I mean, if you go too strict when you start trying to put data in that thing model, you'll
Hmm.
learn really quick that hey, maybe I was just a little too zealous on making the perfect
Right.
model.
Right.
So
And then how do you solve that? You solve that with soft skills, right?
yeah,
Yeah. Yep.
exactly, and just figuring out how to compromise and all that kind of stuff.
For
Um,
sure. Yeah, that's a
but
good
but
one
I,
too. Compromise. Yep.
yeah, but actually, speaking of soft skills too, like
Hmm.
I I seem to recall you talking a little bit about tech masters recently.
Yeah,
You want to tell me a little bit about what it was like working or doing tech masters and kind of what you learned and that kind of thing?
sure, sure. Yeah, and right now, by the way, I'm not a great orator, so keep that in mind. But backing up to when I first started, oh man, I tell you, the first meeting was very humbling, I'll just say. I remember coming in and they had these different things where they had table topics and whatever else, but they had this bell that they ding every time that you say or any of those kind of like filler words. And yeah, I remember them saying, "Hey, I know you're new, but do you want to give it a shot?" And I got all sorts of confidence. There's no lack of confidence here. So I'm like, "Oh yeah, sure." And I'm thinking I'm going to be great at this. Yeah, I wasn't at all. I was like, "Well, first of all, I ding," and it was ding, and I'm like, and then you just started like, "What do I do?" So at first it was extremely humbling, but then after actually getting into it more, there was a lot of things that I learned just from a speaking standpoint, but not just from a speaking standpoint, but um, other ways to communicate, whether it be a power pause or whether it be, something like that anyways. But there's there's something to be said about repetition as well. And when you're up there almost every time, whether it's table topics or you're giving a 5-minute speech or whatever else, if you just do it over and over and over and over again, it's weird on how, us as humans kind of just get used to it and numb to it to where, my first talk, I think there is just shy of 100 people, like 97 or something like that at the Microsoft building, and is on jQuery. Don't get me wrong, I was still nervous, but at the same point, it was a lot better than it would have been otherwise. It probably would have been a train wreck otherwise, and they come up with different things where different ideas where like you're supposed to record yourself and then play it back. And that's
Uh,
actually a pretty painful thing to try, when you're like listening to yourself. But at the same point, it gives you that good feedback, that self feedback is like, actually, I kind of tilt my head this way, or I tick a little bit like that, or, whatever else. So you start figuring those things out and dealing with them. So it was a great all around experience. And for those of you watching that don't know, Tech Masters is a spin-off of Toastmasters, but it's for tech people. And yeah, I definitely owe a lot of my soft speaking skills and even a little bit of writing skills based on the time I spent there.
yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Actually, to be honest, when you mentioned like first presentation, you were talking about jQuery. That
Hmm.
really reminds me of the first presentation I did over at Minnesota Pass, the SQL Server org, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
I actually did one service broker because we were using it as kind of a way to do asynchronous processing at the place I was working at the time.
Hmm.
And I was kind of fired up about it. And it wasn't an easy tech, especially for a data guy to learn and figure out and all that kind of stuff. So I
Hmm.
wanted to do a presentation on it. Well,
Sure.
uh, I learned all kinds of really great lessons in that uh, first of all, when I was presenting over on the Microsoft campus, I couldn't get connected to the internet, and for some
Oh
reason,
yeah.
I put my slides in the cloud, right?
Hmm.
So I didn't have access to my slides
Oh
anymore,
my. Oh yes.
which was pretty interesting. But I guess to my credit, I took I just did some note cards just with general. This is kind of what I'm trying to do, right?
Sure,
And
sure.
it actually knows that I was planning on logging into my work machine. And
Hmm.
I know this sounds all kinds of horrible, like just in hindsight, but
Sure.
you know, you gotta learn somehow, right?
Oh yeah.
So so what I ended up doing is I gave the presentation off of note cards and for my demos, I actually wrote out the SQL. And I remember this individual. He's also kind of a leader in our industry, named Steve Hughes. He had been working with it too, and he had been doing it for longer than I. And
Sure.
I remember him, like, shaking his head in approval, like when I was writing
Mm.
out this. It's like, "Phew, I actually
Whew.
got it right.
Yeah, yeah.
But talking about ways to learn on the
Oh
fly.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Now I've had experiences like that too, where, you get on a new network, and then of course how cookies work, all of a sudden you log into this external system, like, we don't know who you are, we need to send emails and call and all this other. It's like, oh my goodness, yeah. Oh yeah,
Can
fun
hear
stuff.
the crickets in the Microsoft meeting space, and like,
Oh
oh.
yeah, yep,
Well,
yep,
yeah, this I really enjoyed uh, kind of talking about some of the tech
yeah,
and
same.
this kind of stuff. It was really enjoyable, and I appreciate you taking the time. I guess one thing I was curious about though is what kind of stuff are you working on right now, and where can people find you online?
Sure. Yeah, I have a few employees, a few contractors working, and we got a couple different projects that we're working on. Um, we're in the private space right now. We're looking to get into the government space, and as well as, utilize the Microsoft partnership a little bit more as well. But to get a hold of us, honestly, it'd be more for, I'd say, folks maybe that are interested in project work, but you can go to the website www.absolutedevelopment.com, and there's a little button up there called, I think it's like schedule a discovery meeting or something like that. Just pop something on my calendar, 15 minutes, we can go over what your thing is, and, possibly at that point kick out something from a discovery standpoint, or at least get a good high level understanding to set up the next steps.
Yeah, and Jesse's definitely a sharp guy, so I highly recommend if
Wow, thank
if
you.
you're looking for dev work for sure. Um, well, thanks again for being here, and once again, this was podcast number one with covering data consulting, and
I'm
I hope,
number one. Oh,
yeah, numero, uh, and I hope everybody has a really great day. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening to the Covering Data podcast. If you'd like to learn more about how I can help you with your database needs, check out my website at coveringdata.com or email me at eric@coveringdata.com. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thanks.